So last year, retail giant Ikea announced that it would raise its starting minimum wage across its different stores across America. Now, Ikea is also making another announcement 1 year after they did so, which I can only assume is bankruptcy, because after all, as conservatives kept telling us, that raising the minimum wage would destroy jobs and bankrupt all companies. So obviously, this has to be a terrible announcement. They're either going out of business or firing boatloads of people. Not great for the economy. So what is this announcement? Well, it turns out that they're actually raising their wages again. And for this, I go to the Huffington Post. Now, a year after it first announced a major minimum wage hike in its U.S. stores, Ikea said today that it plans to implement another nationwide raise to its wage floor next year, bringing the average store starting pay to about $12 per hour. Now, this is interesting. The system that they actually use would reflect the cost of living in its different stores. So you would actually have, say, a store in a different state, Alabama, with a lower minimum or with a lower living wage standard, lower living standard, where everything's a little bit cheaper, having it a different wage from, say, having a store in New York, which would obviously have a higher living standard, which means you would have a higher wage. It's kind of an interesting, kind of an innovative approach that is actually kind of fits into the conservative thing of you can't have a policy one-size-fits-all solution. It's actually kind of innovative, and it seems like it would save them money while still actually helping workers in the local areas. Now, under the system, as I said, the starting wage for any given store reflects the cost of living determined by the MIT living wage calculator. So that takes into account the local cost of rent, food, transportation, as well as other costs. Now, after the second round of raises, which is slated for this coming January, all of the company stores will be paying at least $10 per hour starting out. That doesn't mean you can't get raises later on for good performance. And the average minimum wage across all locations will be about $11.87. That is a 10.3% increase over the previous year. Now, asking the CFO of Ikea, talking to Huffington Post, now obviously he's got to look at this and be like, yeah, you know, we lost so much money doing this that things are terrible. We're going to have to do something different, right? No, he says, and according to the Huffington Post, he said, our decision to do this and the aftermath, well, we're very pleased so far. And seeing how this minimum wage has affected people, this higher wage for our workers, we're very pleased with the results. What were the results? What kind of benefits has Ikea seen since they raised this wage last year? Well, for one, they reported a little bit less turnover. Now, admittedly, it's been about 6 months since the wages went into effect, but Olson says the Ikea is on pace to reduce turnover by about 5% or better. Now, what does that mean? What does turnover have to do with costs? Well, if you have a higher turnover, it means you have to recruit more workers and spend time and money and effort training them, giving them outfits if they have the work uniform, for example, as well as I said, production lost, time lost for getting somebody up to speed. Now, you cut down on that, you're going to cut down on costs. You're going to eliminate those initial costs. And the workforce is, of course, going to be more productive. Now, also, speaking of the workforce, it attracts more qualified applicants. Now, if they're actually going to get paid a better wage, then you're going to have better quality of applicants. People who are better workers, who are more consistent. People who are ready, willing, and able to work will want to actually work at your store as opposed to your competitor that's still offering a very low wage, which, of course, in the retail field, you have to compete with Walmart offering very low wages, which, by the way, Walmart itself gave a little bit of a wage increase already. But as I said, Ikea is the only one using the MIT living wage calculator in order to calculate what kind of wages it will offer in different places. So that's what makes IKEA unique in this regard, which I think is a really good idea. Now, pay for retail workers, as I said, is actually pretty low. Speaking of Walmart, an industry wage of just $12.38 per hour. And this is according to data gleaned from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, IKEA's average store wage is actually starting to head towards and above $15 an hour, your $15 minimum living wage. That's a start. That's a start. Now, you can argue that it needs to go further, and I agree with that sentiment, but it's a start. And so you got to give them a little bit of credit for starting. Now, the company opened 2 new locations. So already it's opening new locations in different places. They're expanding business instead of losing business. It makes perfect business sense. One in Kansas and one in Miami. And these higher wages have helped the company, as I said, to lure in more candidates. It really is very good news when it comes to this stuff. Now, when it comes to the reasons of why they're raising the wage, it's not just a good thing to do, right? It is a good thing. It helps the workers, but it also helps the company. Huffington Post explains. These decisions are partly in response for calls to higher wages, but also they're calculated business decisions made in an improving labor market. As the economy recovers and unemployment falls, retailers have to compete to attract talent in a way they didn't need to do during the recession and sluggish recovery. Now, Olson said, look, these wages, they're meant to create better everyday life for many people. And at the same time, it also makes strong business sense. You raise your wages for your workers, and you actually treat them like human beings that are worthy of a living wage, and you will have better business. You will have less turnover. You will have happier employees, which are more productive employees, and you will end up having better service. More customers will want to return to your store, and also your workers can also become your customers as well if they have enough money now to shop at your store. It makes strong business sense. Raising wages makes strong business sense. And conservative heads just exploded.